Very good afternoon to everybody. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you all to the continued diagnostic education series of CAHO Diagnostic Division. And today we are here to discuss a very important concept. I'm sure everyone in the lab area who has some idea of an NABL and quality are always, overwhelmed with this concept of Six Sigma and total allowable error, bias. And to discuss this topic, we have a very prolific speaker whom I know as a senior consultant in the very same organization that I work in, Dr. Puneeta Bhatia ma'am. So ma'am is working as a quality advisor and a senior consultant in biochemistry and immunoassay at Healthians Lab, Gurgaon. And ma'am has a rich experience in conducting NABL audits the past 13 years. And needless to say, she is a very good prolific speaker and a very good person. And she has executive program in healthcare management degree from IIM Calcutta. So I'm sure we have a lot to learn from ma'am. Over to ma'am.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your esteemed presence. I would like to extend my gratitude to the CAHO, Colonel Dr. Pramod, Dr. Santavna, and Dr. Zubair for having invited me and giving me this opportunity. The topic today is very interesting, which is the concept of bias, total error, and Six Sigma. I've tried to put it in a format which is we cover the basics, go into some amount of depth, yet not into too much of detail that has become mind-boggling. I've tried to put in examples from day-to-day situations or graphs or diagrams to make it understandable. And of course, we'll take questions at the end of the session. So good evening, everybody. We start off with today's topic, which is bias, total error, and Six Sigma. Well, I have labeled it further. I've added a couple of words which says, in pursuit of excellence, going the extra mile. So I would like to begin with a quote from Dr. Atul Gawande, one of my favorite authors, who has written a lot of stuff and a lot of books on healthcare and how improvement is possible in healthcare. One of his famous books is called Better, A Surgeon's Notes on Performance. And he says, better is possible. It does not take genius, it takes diligence. It takes moral clarity, it takes ingenuity, and above all, it takes a willingness to try. So let's begin on this line. So the first topic of these three today is bias. So what is bias? Bias is the systematic deviation of laboratory test results from the actual value. There is another closely used word called trueness. So what's the difference between the two? Trueness is the closeness of agreement between the average of an infinite number of replicate measured quantity values and a reference quantity value. And bias is the quantitative expression of trueness. I repeat that trueness is how close you are to the reference quantity value, but this closeness is not between a single value. It is between the average of many replicates and a reference value. And bias is the quantitative expression of trueness. What is the impact of bias? It has a lot of importance because significant bias in our measurement results can cause misdiagnosis or misestimation of the disease progress or prognosis. And it can lead to errors in medical decisions and can lead to increased healthcare costs. Now, again, we use the word inaccuracy and bias quite often. So they are pretty much used synonymously, bias and inaccuracy. But now by the ISO and the CLSI, they have been using them and they make a distinction between these terms. Inaccuracy relates to how closely a single measurement will agree with the true values, whereas bias relates to how an average of a series of measurements will relate to the true value. In the first case of inaccuracy, the imprecision is contributing to the lack of agreement, whereas in the second case, the imprecision is ideally minimized by the average. Right? In inaccuracy, it's a single measurement, so the imprecision is there. In the bias, there is a average. Therefore, the imprecision is minimized or ideally it is removed. That's the difference between bias and inaccuracy. Now, what do we need to measure the bias? We need two things to measure the bias. And if they are not there, then we actually cannot measure the bias. So one should be careful when someone tells you this is the bias. You need to know the reference quantity or the assigned value. which is the benchmark, which is what are we measuring against? What is the reference quantity or the reference value? And if we don't have a reference value, what is the assigned value? That's one. And the second, we need the replicate measurement of that quantity or the mean of repeated measurements. I'm repeating that for bias, we can't have a single measurement. We have to have repeated measurements and the mean of those repeated measurements. So we need the reference quantity or the assigned value, and then we have to have the replicate measurement of that quantity or the mean of those replicate measurements. Now, the reference quantity can be determined in two usual ways. One is to use certified reference materials, which are also called as CRMs, or we can use fresh patient samples, which have been processed using reference methods. Now, if we do not have a reference quantity, then a value which is assigned or assigned value is taken to estimate the bias. So if any of these two components is not known or is incorrectly determined, then we cannot have a correct estimation of the bias. There are two kinds of bias. One is called a constant bias and the other one is called as a proportionate bias. A constant bias is where the difference between the target values and the measured values is constant. Let's say they are different by 3 milligram per deciliter, irrespective of the level. The next one is a proportionate bias, where the difference between the target value and the measured value is proportional to the amount of the measurand. What is a measurand? Measurand is the substance or the analyte or what we are measuring. So a constant bias will stay constant between the target value and the measured value, and a proportionate bias will keep changing depending upon amount of the analyte. So between the two, I think most of us will agree that a proportionate bias is more common in our day-to-day situations whenever we are tackling or dealing with bias. This is a sort of a little diagram to show you. The first value, there is a test result and there is a reference result. Test result is on the y-axis, which we are testing for the bias, and the reference result, which we take as the assigned value or the reference value, is on the x-axis. And there is a constant bias showing that there is a constant difference between the two lines in this graph. Then there is a proportional bias in the next one. Here, these lines are not at a constant difference. Bias is depending upon the value of the analyte. And on the third, there is a mix of constant and proportional bias, which has elements of a constant bias and a proportional bias. Now, causes of bias can be many. There can be a bias when we are taking samples. Now, you can say, why can there be a bias when taking samples? For example, the patient has first given the sample when he was walking around. And sometimes you take a sample when he has been lying down. So when the patient is changing from the lying down position to the standing position because of gravity, the blood volume or the plasma volume will differ by almost like 10%. And that can increase the concentration of certain macromolecules and cells in the blood of the patient. So there's a simple bias even because of the posture of the patient. And therefore, there is a bias when taking samples. Then there can be a bias due to the instability of the sample during transport or storage. Here, for example, there is extreme heat or extreme cold and any kind of mechanical effects on the cells, on the blood gases when they are transporting samples through pneumatic tubes in a hospital transport system. So pneumatics are in a hospital transport system. Otherwise, sample delivery even within our other labs, which are not hospital-based labs, if you do not adhere to the guidelines for proper temperature, that can also lead to instability of the sample during transport or storage. Another example is that there is a different sample matrix in the aqueous materials and in the QC materials. So that can also lead to a bias. There is sometimes uncorrected loss of measurement at the time of extraction. For example, in case of mass spec or HPLC, when we are preparing a sample for the procedure, at that time, it is possible that some kind of a loss is being happening before the sample is actually put into the MSMS or the LCMS system. There can be error when the calibrator is prepared because of incorrect volume measurements or weighing of the calibrators in the laboratory. There also can be interference because of hemolysis or icterus because of the color of hemoglobin, of the color of bilirubin, or because of the presence of proteins or lipids, that is hyperproteinemia, like in myeloma or lipemic cases. These can all cause interference in the samples. Then we can have certain molecules which specifically will interfere with the reagents. For example, in the measurement process. And the commonest example of this is in immunoassays, we have presence of heterophilic antibodies, which can interfere with the reagents. And another example where bias it can happen is because of immunoassays, where there are different epitopes being used for different immunoassays in different kits. The antibodies are against different epitopes, and they are specific, and there can be bias between two measurements. Okay, so these are examples of causes of bias, which can be many. Now, when we compare a method, when we establish a new test, or we set up a new method, or we validate or rather verify a new equipment in our lab, at that time, as a part of our method verification, the right word is method verification, not validation. At that time, bias assessment is a very important step in the method verification exercise. And how do we do it? What we do is we set a set of specimens is assayed by both the existing method and the new method, which we also call as the candidate method, and the results are compared. In this exercise, we usually use patient samples which have got excess volume, in the sense that they have got surplus volume. We have run them on one method and there is enough volume for the other method. Now, patient samples, they don't have any pre-established value, right? You have run them on the existing instrument that you had in your laboratory. So that is the assigned value, but you do not know if that instrument may have its own errors in the backend. So this itself may have its shortcomings. So if possible, if you can include samples from EQUAS programs, which are within stability limits, or from reference sources like CDC or other, reference labs or such bodies, it will definitely help because they have pre-assigned values. The disadvantage of these reference samples is their cost is usually prohibitory and their matrix may not be appropriate. It might not be exactly commutable with the patient sample matrix. A common question people want to know is how many specimens should we do in this exercise or take? CLSI has suggested a minimum of 20 samples for this bias comparison, assessment exercise and method comparison. Although 40 or more samples is ideal to provide a thorough investigation, but 20 is also adequate. What is important is that the samples should span the AMR, the analytical measurement range, or the range of interest of the values. So we must include samples across low, normal, high, to put it simply, or across AMR, or across the medical levels, and especially include the medical decision limits. So that's very important, so that our process of bias assessment and comparison is more robust once we have taken a whole range of the values. Also, they can be run in duplicates to get the values obtained with more certainty. So that's one suggestion when you're doing a bias assessment during method comparison. Now, this is a small example. If you can see, we have the value on of urea on equipment 1, equipment 2, and we've got about 20 samples here. N is equal to 20 in both the cases. The mean is derived. This is a simple Excel sheet, and SD is available, a slope is available, right? And I will explain this. Yeah. So we'll come back to this. Now, it is better to run these samples in small batches by both the methods at the same time over several days rather than 20 in one run. Now, the reason for that is pretty obvious, because when you run the samples across in small batches over several days, you are providing more challenge in terms of variation, temperature variation, operator variation, controls have been run, instrument maintenance has been done, ancillary reagents have been changed, water quality may have been a little different from day to day. And therefore, you are subjecting your experiment to more stresses and making it more robust. So it's better to run these in small batch rather than do all 20 in one large run. It is advisable to do them. In fact, when you tell your labs how to do a method verification exercise, It is a duty of the quality team or whatever is the corresponding team in your organizations, that we must run these samples over a minimum of 10 days, and also specify that we must have all the samples of our interest: normal, abnormal, low, normal, high, and so on. Now, how do you analyze the data? The data is, you display the data on an XY axis plot, and results from the existing method on the X axis and from the new method on the Y axis. This graphical representation will be able to show you the correlation between the two methods, the new method and the older method. Beyond that, once you do this basic look at the data and see if it's linear or any aberrations, beyond that, there are many ways to compare methods. The more you read in literature or textbooks or different guidelines, there are different methods to go. One of the popular methods, though there is some debate to this also, but it is being commonly used, is to use the correlation coefficient, which is called the R, the correlation coefficient. This is calculated by simple least square regression analysis, which is possible in the Excel. The R value should be more than 0.975 to be acceptable. An example of the same is what I was going to show you, and here it is. So here we see there's a Beckman Coulter. It could be any machine for that matter. The parameter in this question is urea. There are 20 samples. We had the same value, sample run equipment 1, we got 66.8, here is 67.9. The next one is 24.4, 24.9. Skipping a few, we get 26.7, 27.6, 22.3, 22.8, and so on. And thus we've done 20 samples. We got the mean, the SD, the slope, and we find that the R, the correlation is absolutely perfect 1. It has to be more than 0.975. 1 is very much satisfactory, thus indicating that both of these methods are concordant. Now, one of these equipments would have been your earlier standardized equipment, which you take as a reference equipment, and the value obtained on that equipment is your reference value or the assigned value. Why would you say that? Because that equipment has probably been subject to routine use, daily IQC, you have run various EQUAS samples, you have run patient samples on that instrument, you have not received any complaints. So the instrument is performing satisfactorily. And equipment 2 is the new instrument on which you are validating this particular analyte, and thus you are comparing the methods for the bias on the 2. So that's how one way of looking at it is by the R, which is the correlation coefficient. Now, there are two other ways of comparing two methods. The Bland-Altman graph is supposed to be a very powerful graphic tool to evaluate the agreement between two methods, but you have to have the correct way of interpretation and also an adequate sample size. And the other one is a passing Pavlov regression, which can also be used to evaluate the presence of constant and proportionate bias between the two methods. So Bland-Altman plot looks like this. On the x-axis, we have the average measurement, and on the y-axis, we have the difference between the measurements. As I said, whether it is the Bland-Altman or it is the earlier regression analysis, we need to have the study set should be adequate, a minimum of 20 samples. The more the better, spread across the AMR, that is the analytical measurement range. You have included samples of all medical decision limits or of clinical interest to you. All those values are incorporated, and run them not in one large batch, but probably over at least 2 days over in the laboratory, smaller batches. So that is the way you will be understanding or comparing the bias between two methods. Now, is the bias clinically important or unimportant? It's very important because measurements in clinical chemistry are used for. So I speak of clinical chemistry because I'm a biochemist, but this holds true for all disciplines in the laboratory. Same, you can talk the same for hematology, the same for serology. So measurements in the laboratory are used for diagnosing diseases or for monitoring the effects of the treatment. So which is a bias which is clinically important? A bias that is clinically important is one which is likely to influence the clinical decision between health and disease, right? When studied in the context of all other uncertainty components, including biological variation. This is important to understand that what is an important bias, where your bias is going to differentiate the clinical decision between whether a patient is healthy or a patient is sick. But you have to also take it in the context of all the other components of uncertainty, including biological variation. If that bias is changing your decision between health and disease, then definitely it is a clinically important bias. An unimportant bias is a bias which does not fulfill this criteria. So it's also important to know there is a bias, and further important to judge whether that bias is clinically important or not important. Because again, you're going to work on it, work to reduce the bias. Everything involves time, effort, cost, manpower, reagents. So it should be justified when you're working to reduce a particular bias. So that was the first section on bias. Now we come to the next, having given a background of bias, we come to the next topic, which is the total allowable error or the allowable total error. So, yes. So again, reiterating the point, in today's times, we have automation, we have sophistication. So fast is fine, but accuracy is everything. And I think it could not be more important than in healthcare, where in the lab, every tube is a patient. So accuracy is very important. We owe it to our patients to give them accurate reports. So hence the concept of total allowable error or allowable total error is very important. Now, where do errors come from? You can say, why should there be an error? So error will always be there. Measurements are never made under perfect conditions. In a laboratory, errors can come from the measuring instrument, from the analyte being measured, from any important uncertainties, from errors on part of the user because of sampling issues. There can be so many reasons because of which an error can come into the measurement. Now we need to understand the concept of total error or total analytical error. Total error, in short form, it's quite often written as TE, is the overall error in a test result, which is attributable to both the imprecision and the inaccuracy. Imprecision is usually expressed in terms of percentage CV, that's coefficient of variation, and inaccuracy is usually expressed as bias percentage. So total error combines both these aspects. Now, imprecision usually causes random error and inaccuracy usually causes systematic error. So when we club both these sources or types of error, we get total error. It combines bias and imprecision to quantify the largest acceptable variation from the true or target value. Now, the concept is assuming that the difference between the measured value and the true value can actually be measured. Obviously, there has to be a baseline assumption that you're able to find a difference between the measured value, what you're measuring in your lab, and whatever true value or reference value you have assigned to it, or it is the actual value. How do we calculate total error? The common or total analytical error or total error, they're the same thing. The formula which is commonly used is systematic error, which is expressed as the bias plus random error. Random error is a 1.65 as a factor into the imprecision. So total error is a very useful metric to both to set goals and also to assess the quality of the laboratory assays. It provides you a simple, cost-effective method for evaluating the performance in the laboratory of a particular test. The other term is total allowable error. Now, what is the difference between total error and total allowable error? Total allowable error, which is commonly written as TEA, is the amount of error that can be tolerated without invalidating the medical usefulness of the analytical result. We'll again read this, that it is the amount of error that can be tolerated without invalidating the medical usefulness of the analytical result. So knowing the total error in a system will be of clinical use only if there is a benchmarking for the allowable error of that analyte. So in the previous slide, we have seen that we need to get this formula we can use by systemic error and random error and get a total error. Then we come to a new term called total allowable error. That means if the error is beyond that, then the medical usefulness of the result is invalidated. It's of no use to us. So Again, coming back, we need to know total error. With the benchmark, there are total error cannot exceed a certain limit, and that is the total allowable error. There's no, we need to, when we do exercise of establishing total error, of calculating total error in a system, we must have a benchmark to compare with. If there is no benchmark, then you're doing only half the work. And that result will not be useful, of any use to us, right? Now we go on to, just let this topic flow. So here there are different scenarios of accuracy and precision. Here you see on the top left a scenario where there is a low accuracy and a low precision. Typically, to explain accuracy and precision, the bullseye model or the target model or the dart model is taken, and same as in this picture. So this is the bullseye, the center of the target, and if you hit right in the bullseye, you are accurate, and if you're able to hit again and again, you are precise as well, right? So accuracy means you are on the true value, and precision means that your repeatability is good. In this scenario, there is both low accuracy and low precision, because you see values, only one is in the bullseye, others are all scattered here. So there is one very little accuracy and very poor precision. On the top right, we find all the values have come to a particular place. They've all clustered here, repeated attempts, repeated hits. There is a good precision because they have clustered at one place, but they are far, far away from the bullseye, from the target value. So we say there is a high precision but low accuracy. Coming down further here to the bottom left, you have a high accuracy. They are pretty much close to the target value, and many are within the bullseye, but there is a low precision. There is a low precision. And on the bottom right is the ideal situation, where we have high accuracy and high precision. All the dots are in the target area, and all of them are in the, and also the repeated attempt, all the dots are in they're clustered together. That is that it's an ideal case of high accuracy and high precision, right? Okay. Next, now this situation again, you see, yeah, this is the case of mixed scenarios here again. The screen is slightly being cut off here. Here, if you see, this is again precise but inaccurate, far away. Here, there is both accurate and precise, and here there is a inaccurate and imprecise. So total error, yeah, inaccurate but precise, right? So there is a bias here. Both there is accurate and precise here, and here there is an imprecise, inaccurate and imprecise both. So imprecision is usually expressed in terms of standard deviation or coefficient of variation. Inaccuracy or accuracy is expressed in terms of bias, and here at the bottom we have a better one, which is both accurate and precise. Total error is a combination of inaccuracy expressed by bias and imprecision expressed by SD. SD can be converted to a percentage. If you do SD upon mean into 100, makes it CV. So here there is a combination of SD and bias. That's the total error. To explain to you that total error is looking at random error and systematic error, inaccuracy and imprecision, bias and SD. They're all terms for similar things. Random error, imprecision, SD is one set. Inaccuracy, systematic error and bias is another set. I hope you are able to follow. Now, systematic error. What's a systematic error? It's a consistent change in the analytical system. It affects all samples equally in a proportionate manner. It can result in a shift of the mean of the control values. Either there can be a shift in a gradual manner, which is called as a trend, or there can be an abrupt change, which is a sudden, it's a shift. There can be a trend or it can be a shift. If there's a trend, then there is a gradual, subtle loss in the reliability of the test system, right? This is an example of a systematic error in a Levy-Jennings chart, right? The upper one shows a shift which is abrupt, and here a trend which is downward, which is gradual. This has developed over time. It is gradually going down, a little below the mean, a little lower, and finally it goes down over these 7 or 8 points. Whereas here an abrupt shift has happened from the almost being on the mean, it has crossed the 2 SD limits, and then it continues to stay up there, and there is an abrupt shift upward, which is a shift. The downward one is a trend. The second one is a trend. Yeah. What can be the common causes for trends? There can be a deterioration of the instrument light source that happens as the lamp will decay, or dust collection. There can be accumulation gradually of debris in the reagents or the sample tubings, or on the surfaces of electrodes in the instrument, or your onboard reagents are deteriorating slowly, or your calibrators have deteriorated slowly over time. QC material has gradually deteriorated, or there is some temperature error in the incubation chamber is something which builds up. All these are common causes for trends, and eventually a error to build up typically in an automation, chemistry, or even assay systems. Shift. A shift is something obviously more dramatic, more drastic. It just happens because of causes like a sudden failure or a change in the light source. There's a change in the reagent formulation, or a change in the lot of the reagent which may not be satisfactory. There could be a failure in the sampling system, or samples not being picked up or aspirated correctly, or a reagent dispensing system, something wrong in the probes or the pipettes or the pistons which are responsible for dispensing the reagent in the reaction cuvettes, or there is inaccurate calibration or inaccurate recalibration, or a major instrument maintenance. These are all factors which can cause shifts and sudden changes in the charts or the curves. A random error happens. Suddenly any unexpected deviation is happening from the expected result. It's an inconsistent change, right? Expected or acceptable random error is within the defined standard deviations, but typically unexpected or unacceptable random error is plus minus 3 standard deviations. Random error is computed from the CV percentage as 1.65, which is the factor into CV that gives you a numerical assessment of the random error. Now, a random error LJ chart, very common. A 1,3S rule violation is a classic example of a random error happening in our day-to-day QC program. Common reasons for random errors: bubbles in reagent, temperature fluctuation, poor operator technique. Common reasons for systematic errors, again, sample handling, reagent changing, bias in the instrument, calibration bias, any method is inappropriate, multiple reasons. So all of these, I hope they've given you into an insight of what are types of errors, random and systematic error, because ultimately, coming back to total error is a combined value of both inaccuracy and imprecision. Total error is the sum total of systematic error and random error, where systematic error, the bias is calculated by, they say we will subtract the observed mean from the true mean, and random error is 1.65 into the CV. That is one way of putting across total error. Another term is very often used, which is measurement uncertainty, which is not the topic of today's talk, but just one slide to it, because we must learn to differentiate. Both are very important, both are extensively used, and both are often misunderstood, and both affect our results. So measurement uncertainty is the quantification of the doubt about the measurement result. That means, what is the percentage of doubt in my measured result? This much measurement answer. Let's say 2%, 3% is my MU or measurement uncertainty. Whereas total error is the difference between the measured value and the true value. So there is a difference. Although they are very similar, we quite often use them interchangeably, which is absolutely incorrect. But it is important to learn the difference between total error and measurement uncertainty. Now, going on in the total error, we need to understand now what is a quality specification or requirement. Now, quality specifications or quality requirements are important to set in the lab, because they help you to interpret your lab test results, because they provide you a perspective about how much variation in your results is acceptable, and also the potential significance of any abnormal findings. I repeat, quality specifications They help you to provide a perspective about the variability of the results, which are acceptable interval, and the significance of the abnormal findings. The TEA specifications also we will learn, which can be adopted for the labs. So total allowable error and total error, which can be adopted for the labs. We need to know how should we fix our TEA, and ultimately we have understood now that our total error, which is TE, has to be less than the TEA. Now, setting these quality specifications. It is very important to lab operations to set the quality specifications. If you don't set quality specifications, you don't know whether what you're doing is right or not right, and whether your patient results are recorded accurately or not accurately. You need to set your quality specifications in terms of your lab's total allowable error limits. And these quality specifications state that the measurement error requirements that must be met for a test system to be considered accurate in reporting patient results. So these total error limits or quality specifications, they define how much of measurement error is acceptable to continue to say that your patient results are accurate. You have to set your own benchmarks, your own limits. If the absolute difference between the reported value and the actual value is more than these limits, then you know that your patient result is not reliable. So you have to set your quality specifications. Sometimes they're also called as quality goals. Now, what does the lab need to do? It sounds like there's a lot of, it's very complicated, but it's not like that. Labs are allowed to establish their own requirements. It is the lab director who is ultimately responsible for defining and documenting the reasoning for setting those quality limits. In fact, Dr. James Westcott, who is, undisputably the father of modern quality assurance in the laboratory, has stated in his article, which is called Calibration Verification, Defining Criteria for Acceptable Performance. He says, very important, that truth be told, the laboratory is free to do whatever it wants. So no one is compelling you to set a particular limit. But it is important that you have a rationale for it and document the reason for that. And the lab director or the clinical consultant should sign off on whatever limits are set for your own acceptable error guidelines or your quality goals. It seems like a challenge to set these goals, but it's not such a big challenge. There is something called the Stockholm hierarchy. In 1999, at a conference in Stockholm, Sweden, the IFCC, which is the International Federation of Clinical Chemistry and Laboratory Medicine, the WHO, the World Health Organization, and the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, IUPAC, they got together and they developed a hierarchy for quality specification. Hierarchy means there is a step-by-step process for quality specifications. Now, this is in summary, this is the Stockholm hierarchy of desirability. The Stockholm desirability says, first thing is look at specific clinical situations. Assess how the analytical performance will affect specific clinical decisions. So the first, that's why the first importance is given to medical decision levels. So because of the clinical situation. The second is given to biological variation, because they have the Stockholm rule said that look at general clinical situations, right? The biological variation of an analyte as compared to how large an imprecision or a bias can be. The third was professional recommendations or published total allowable error for specific sets of analyte from, let's say, CLIA or RCPA or CAP guidelines. The fourth is set by regulation, like the CLIA regulation, and EQUAS, like mandated goals limits. And the fifth is any state of the art, like for example, some other particular consensus program you have within the labs. And the last is the Tonks rule. So this is the TEA values. I repeat, one is the medical decision limits. So you can set your total error guidelines depending on medical decision limits. That's the first top priority, best thing to do, use by. Second is the biological variation. The third is the proficiency testing guidelines. The fourth is your proficiency testing results. The fifth is Tonks rule. Tonks rule states that the total error can be up to 25% of your biological reference interval, BRI, and the next one is your current standard deviation multiplied by 3. So these are different orders of the Stockholm hierarchy of desirability, which you need to keep in mind when you have to set up your total error limits in your laboratory. Okay, let's see a few examples. Medical decision requirements. The first one, very few analytes have been expressed in terms of medical decision requirements. But example of one like HbA1c has been defined by the NGSP, which is the National Glycohemoglobin Standardization Program. They have been working on harmonizing HbA1c requirement measurements across the world, and they have defined that a total allowable error of HbA1c should not exceed 6%. So TA of 6%, one example of a medical decision limit. Then the National Cholesterol Education Program. These are both US-based programs. They're not Indian programs, but they are definitely followed world over, and we have guidelines from them in textbooks as well. Here they have defined the total allowable error for cholesterol to be less than 9%, for HDL cholesterol to be less than 13%, for LDL to be 12%, and for triglycerides to be 15%. So these are the medical decision requirements. There are very few analytes defined as such, but we have a few of them, and these are in front of you. Then we come to biological variation database. Now, there is a natural fluctuation of the body fluid constituents around the homeostatic setting point, and this is called biological variation. This is within subject variation. That means from person A to person B, and there can be a between subject variation, that is within the body of the same individual, depending on diurnal rhythms, depending on stressors, and so many other factors. They can be within the subject. You can have variations. So biological variation can also be used to set your analytical quality specifications. The biological variation database is available on the Westcard website and on many other database sites on the internet. And the credit for that goes to Carmen Ricos and Dr. Callum Fraser. They have worked on this database, and it is updated every few years. They update it. It's a very exhaustive database of biological variation, and we can see what is the guidelines which have been given, minimal, optimal, maximum, and we can pick up those variations for our laboratory. We have an example coming up shortly here. This is the examples of biological variation. This is how they say. For example, now there is a alpha-1 antitrypsin. There are papers here. This is the biological variation where CVI indicates within subject biological variation, and CVG, it means between subject biological variation. Then they've given the desirable specifications also. I is imprecision, B is bias, inaccuracy, and T is total error. I is the desirable specification for imprecision, B is the desirable specification for inaccuracy, and C is the total, this column is total allowable error, which is desirable specification for allowable total error. A very exhaustive database which can really be useful. There are three kinds of biological variation. They have said minimal specifications, desirable specifications, and optimal specifications. The laboratory can adopt any of them as per their guidelines, again keeping in mind the clinical utility of that test, and how if you are keeping very tight limits, that's also not good. You are necessarily subjecting yourself to false rejections, and if you are keeping very loose limits, that also not good, because you are taking a risk of making your reports get affected, ultimately adding to the inaccuracy. So you have to look at whatever limits you want the lab can adopt and set them as their guidelines. This is an example of the proficiency testing limits, which is set by CLIA, which is the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Act of 88. Few common examples, like for example, in albumin, it is for, let's say it is plus minus 10%. For alkaline phosphatase, it is plus minus 30%. For some of the parameters, for example, free thyroxine is given as target value plus minus 3 SD. For glucose, it is target value in both plus minus 10% or plus minus 6 milligram per deciliter. So these are the common analytes are easily available on the CLIA proficiency testing guidelines. These are available easily. One can use these also for your own total error guidelines. Then now, so you should set the quality specifications of your lab as the total error being less than of course you cannot exceed the TEA limits. So set your total error limits to be less than the TEA limits. Calculate the total error, compare the two. Whether your total error is lesser than the total allowable error, or it is more, or it is the same, compare and then see how you can improve yourself, take corrective actions and use continual improvement to improve your own figures. So that was a bit about total error, total allowable error in your laboratory. I hope you are following. And now the third and last segment of this talk, that is about Six Sigma, which is a journey of continuous improvement. I like this quote that the biggest room in this world is the room for improvement. And Six Sigma definitely is a journey of continuous improvement. Many of you would have heard about Six Sigma. It is something which is not just in the healthcare industry. It is applicable to practically every field. Let's see what is Six Sigma. How did it all start? Six Sigma is also called Sigma Metrics. It was developed by the Motorola company in 1985. Yes, the same Motorola who used to make mobile phones and other products. It was created to help measure and improve the manufacturing production processes. It became more famous after 10 years when General Electric, GE, which is a very famous conglomerate of industries and one of the most famous, one of the earliest famous conglomerates in the world, they also adopted Six Sigma and Sigma metrics and successfully implemented it. And that's when in 1995, Six Sigma rose to fame. It is both a metric and a methodology. And it is a metric, as a metric, it is used as a scale for quality. Now, what is the concept? Six Sigma is a data-driven process improvement system scheme which focuses on adding value by removing the defects. We'll say it again. It's a data-driven, so you have to have data. It has to be objective. It is a data-driven process improvement system scheme which is focusing on adding value to your system by removing the defects. So it relies on your measuring processes. You have to measure correctly. You have to make improvements. It is based on statistical concepts. And at the end of it, it reduces errors and defects. The history of Six Sigma, it was developed by, like I said, it was developed by Michael Harry and Michael Harry and Bill Smith in Motorola in 1979. In that period, this was a period of evolution. It underwent more of design at Motorola and Texas Instruments between 1986 and 1992. It was refined further by the company ABB, which is famous Asia Brown Boveri and Allied Signals up to 94. And then between 94 to 96, it was widely used by GE and it was like successful for GE. It was among the first recipients of, Motorola was among the first recipients for the Malcolm Baldrige Award, National Quality Award in 1988. In 1996 and 1997, there were other users like Bombardier, Siebel, Nokia, and by the late 90s, there were very famous manufacturing corporations like Lockheed Martin, Sony, Polaroid, Avery, Crane, our very own Indian Wipro, all of them are using it. And today, it is used across the world by big names like Infosys, Bank of America, DuPont, and so many others. That is the historical aspect of how Six Sigma started in 1979, underwent a period of evolution, then a period of design, a period of refinement, and then there were results and more awareness, adaptation, and then there was enlightenment. And now you have so many courses, so many workshops on Six Sigma. You have yellow belt, green belt, black belt, champion, so on and so forth. It's a big thing. So now let's see how we compare, how do labs compare to other industries in terms of the Sigma metrics. So let's look at the Sigma metrics of common processes, healthcare processes, and lab processes. Let's see the scores and then we'll go on to see what these mean. So airline safety has a scoring Sigma metrics of 6 on 6, which is the highest possible Sigma metric you can get, airline safety. Then there is 4.15 to baggage handling. Then departure delays are not great. There are 2.3. Hospital fatal errors stand at about 4. Hospital acquired infections are about 3.85. Pre-analytical samples, they have a good rating of 5.1. Hemolyzed specimens at 4.1, and controls exceeding limits are at 3.4. And this data has this data is from the Westcott QC, so definitely we can give it a large amount of credibility for its accuracy. Now, are they suited for labs? Sigma metrics are they suited for labs? Yes, they are definitely easily adaptable to lab medicine, and they help the laboratory to move forward. They inculcate a culture of proactivity, of performance which is driven by metrics, of performance which is about continuous improvement, and they definitely enhance the quality-minded culture in the laboratory. Why should we use Six Sigma? It is a quantitative assessment of quality. So interesting to hear. It's a little paradoxical, but interesting that it's a quantitative assessment of quality. It is a universally accepted benchmark. Six Sigma is a world-class performance where where Six Sigma, the six score indicate there is only 3.4 DPM, which is defects per million. It's also called DPMO, which is defects per million opportunities. The minimum. Now, the minimum you need to have is 3 sigma. It is the minimum acceptable quality for a business process or a manufacturing process. A 3 sigma also means 66,807 defects per million. If we look into ourselves and wonder, if we were to actually have 66,807 defects in a million is nothing but 10 lakhs, whether it's QC runs or whether it is patient reports, wouldn't that be huge? So simply sitting at minimum acceptable quality is not going to be the ultimate satisfaction. That no, we are at sigma. No. So 3 sigma is the minimum quality, minimum acceptable standard, but it comes with still a big chunk of defects per million opportunities. Now, once the current level of sigma of a process is known, then we can chalk out the level of improvement and then an action plan. So like all other processes, first you have to have a baseline. Then you make a plan of how you will improve it, and then you chalk out an action plan to work on it. What is the advantage? You might say, why should we adopt a Six Sigma approach? It definitely will reduce the process cycle time. It will reduce your costs, reduce the defects, and increase the accuracy, which is the yield. It will increase the capacity, it will increase your throughput, and it is beneficial to the environment also in terms of reducing pollution. Eventually and definitely it will increase customer satisfaction. And at the end of it all, it will definitely go on to increase profits. Now, seeing the scale, the sigma levels, defects per million, defects in percentage, and how do you rate the performance? At a sigma level of 1, there are 690,000 defects per million, which is like 69%, and the performance is considered to be poor. At 2 sigma, we are at 308,000 or 308,000, 30.8% defects. It continues to be poor. At 3 sigma, we come to 66,800 defects per million opportunities, which is 6.68% defects. And this is marginal. So at 3 sigma, if we achieve, it is just about marginal performance. 4 sigma is much better. You see the change. Look at the effort or look at the difference in every level. 4 sigma, 6,210 defects per million, 0.62% defects, good performance. 5 sigma is 230 defects per million, a defect rate of 0.023%, excellent performance. And 6 sigma, which is world-class performance, has 3.4 defects per million and a defect percentage of 0.0003% and world-class performance. So 6 sigma definitely is world-class performance. 1 and 2 are not acceptable. 3 is just about acceptable. And then it's a hard work all the way up from 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and 5 to 6. Again, a different representation of the same data. The minimum for a stable process, a process is said to be stable at 3 sigma, not before that. That is your 66,800 defects per million. In the earlier slide, we saw the defects. That is 6.68. Here we'll see the yield. So the yield here is 93.32% for 3 sigma. For 1 and 2 sigma, at 1 sigma with so many defects, DPMO of 6,90,000 per million, the yield is just about 30.85%. At 2 sigma, the yield is better in terms of 69.15%. Thereafter, 3 sigma is 93.3, 4 sigma is 99.8, 5 sigma is 99.97, and 6 sigma is 99.997. So this is the sigma level. This is the DPMO, that's defects per million opportunities, and this is the yield. In the previous slide, we had shown the number of defects. Here is the yield. You can take it in, you can look at it either way. As a methodology, it uses the DMAIC, commonly used. DMAIC is a common word for define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And that focuses on eliminating our defects and reducing the variation in the processes. So it uses DMAIC strategy to improve, to eliminate defects and improve your processes and your effectiveness. What do you measure? What do you define? You define the problem. What do you measure? You measure the baseline performance. What do you analyze? You analyze the performance and identify the root cause. What do you improve? You implement solutions and bring about improvement. What do you control? And then you ensure that the improvements are embedded. So DMAIC is a very common acronym for this define, measure, analyze, improve, and control way of improving sigma metrics of a process. It's a hard work all the way. See, there's a lot of the DPM, the defects per million, is reducing with every small improvement in sigma. We are here at 2.8, it is 90. Here at 3.2, we're coming to 96, 3.3, 96%. Then 3.9 is 99, and so on. There's a little, every little bit, even a 0.1, if it's from 4 sigma, you go to 4.1 sigma, there's a better yield. 4.1 to 4.2 to 4. It goes on slowly. So it's not easy to be able to, it's difficult to reach a 6 sigma benchmark. Every little bit also counts. Now, how do we calculate? So we said we will define and we'll calculate the baseline. So how do you calculate the sigma metric? There are 2 ways of doing it, depending upon how your lab uses or documents its total allowable error data. Now, here, if the sigma, here, this is your reference here. If your sigma is, if you're using percentage, then this is what we're using as a total error. Suppose this is our guideline for glucose in our laboratory. We're taking that the total error is 10%, is maximum, plus minus 10% is your upper limit of total allowable error for glucose. And this is the clear guideline. Suppose you got a value, your mean is 190 and your target value is 200. Your bias is about 5% because it is what? 200 minus 10, right? Bias is 10. 10 is your bias. Total error minus bias upon CV. Total error is 10, bias is 5%, and the CV you're obtaining is 3. So 1.67% is your sigma. I repeat, the formula here is total error in percentage, which is 10% from the clear guidelines. The bias you have got, because your difference here is 190 and 200. So 5% of bias here. So 10 minus 5. And the CV you obtained for glucose for that month, let's say it is 3. So 10 minus 5, which is 5, divided by 3, which is 1.67, which is your 1.67. At this value, at this bias and at this CV, your glucose is at a 1.67 sigma. Other example is when you are defining total error in units. You've taken potassium where the 0.5 plus minus 0.5 millimole per liter from target value is taken as the total error. Again, here same total error in the units minus bias upon the SD. Up there it was all percentage expressions. Down here it is only the actual in the absolute value of millimole per liter or milligram per deciliter. Bias for potassium is, let's say, is 3.3 because your observed mean is 6.3 and the target is 6. So the bias is 0.3. So total error is 0.5 minus 0.3 and the SD for potassium is 0.05. Here you are at a 4 sigma level. So that's how you calculate sigma, which is total error minus the bias divided by the CV if it's in terms of percentage. If it is units, then it's total error minus the bias divided by the SD. So we saw that glucose is at 1.67 sigma and potassium is at 4 sigma. This is your baseline calculation of the sigma metric. Then what does it tell you? If the sigma metric is less than 2, means your method has got unacceptable performance, does not meet a requirement for quality, not even when the method is working properly. It is not acceptable for routine operation. The metric is between 2 and 3, means the method has got marginal performance and proves provides the necessary quality when everything is working correctly. Typically, this will need 4 to 8 controls per run, well-trained operators. Don't keep rotating people. Manpower which is more stable, more aggressive PMs, careful monitoring of patient test results, and a continual efforts to improve the method performance. If the metric is between 3 and 4, your method has got fair performance and it meets your requirement for quality and can be managed in routine operations. This will probably require a multi-rule procedure. We're talking about the Westcard rules or the statistical process rules with 4 to 6 control measurements per run. Then sigma is between 4 to 6. It has good performance. It is clearly acceptable. It is well managed in routine operations, and 2 to 4 control measurements per run is sufficient using standard Westcard rules. If it's more than 6 sigma, it is excellent. It is manageable with a single control rule with wide limits. Like you can even use 1.3s or 1.3.5s because it is already at a 6 sigma level. This is how Westcard advises you on or the analytes on how to change the number of runs depending on the sigma metric. Let's see a few examples. Now, having seen this, would like to have a little introspection on what you can do in your lab. If the load per day in your lab is about 1,500 patients, average tests per patient is 5. That's 7,500 tests per day you're running. That is about 27,375. That is 27 lakhs, 37,500 tests per year. Assuming that the average sigma is 3.4, the defects per million organization will be, DPMO will be 78,351 per year, which is 78,351 tests per year, which means again divided by 365, you're getting about 215 results which are defective per day. If that is acceptable to you, or is it acceptable or not acceptable? Why don't you want to set a goal for yourself and work towards a goal of improving your quality and your sigma metrics? So we did a small exercise in our organization. This was a retrospective study conducted over 2 months to see the sigma metrics of 3 lab sites. It was a mixture of lab sites. Some were recently started, some were older established sites. We wanted to see the baseline status, analyze which are the good and not so good performing analytes, see what could be the possible causes for the analytes which have a lower sigma score, and develop an action plan to improve the sigma metrics over the next few months. It was a very basic study, but we wanted to see at least these basic aspects. We focused on the biochemistry tests, on the common biochemistry tests like lipid profile, liver function test, kidney function test, electrolytes, iron studies, immunoglobulins, IgG, AM, hormones like enzymes like amylase, lipase, and other special proteins like ApoA, ApoB, CPK, CPKMB enzymes again, RF, CRP, HSCRP, ASO, again, common tests done in any good laboratory, right? A few tough nuts to crack were sodium, potassium chloride, and phosphorus. The good students we found where they had good sigma metrics were triglycerides, uric acid, LDL cholesterol, iron, gamma GT, ALP, AST, total cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, and iron. Okay. Now, wherever we found low sigma, what the few probable causes that we got on our introspection and analysis was, maybe for a few parameters we're not fixed the lab mean because probably they were, here are manufacturers mean. So the QC values that would have been rejected have not been rejected so far, and they have a wide range of acceptance, and they were skewing the data of the QC. Some of the analytes in the values are reported in whole numbers. This is a setting in your analyzer and in your lab information system, which was increasing the CV. In some cases, it was the stability and the shelf life of the QC material and the calibrator. We also found that there was a potential for improvement in the QC handling or aliquoting processes or running practices in some of the labs. So with this introspection, we suggested a workup to improve the sigma metrics. We would review the calibration frequency more aggressively. We would ensure that all the maintenance protocols of the equipment were adhered to properly and fully. We would review the LJ chart on a daily basis to check for any shifts or trends and obviously take action whenever we found any. We would implement more QC runs and rules for analytes where we were getting low sigma score. We would define lab mean and SD for all analytes as soon as we got the basic data of 20 points. And we would impart regular training to our technical staff on good lab practices. So the power of daily monitoring plus the power of periodic review, using all our data systematically, monitoring daily or periodically, getting the CVs or the SD, getting a target, getting a total allowable error, and arriving at a sigma limit, setting goals, selecting rules, and following rules. All of this has got really, really helpful results. So use data, same thing, arrive at a score target, set the goals, select rules, and follow the QC rules. Now, Westcards also has a stepwise advisory for estimation of sigma. He says define your rules or goals for intended use. That is, define your specific specifications for the analyte or quality specifications using TEA. Validate the method performance by estimating your CV, SD bias. Do the sigma metric calculation. Select the rule to improve which Westcard rule will do to improve or maintain the sigma metric, and then design an appropriate QC strategy for improving the quality control process. This is a good summation of what we have discussed in the last few slides. On Westcard, advice on as per them, the number of QC runs and rules should increase with a sigma metrics going low. So on parameters where the score is only between 1 and 3, he suggests 2 runs and 4 controls per run, and multi rules like 1-3S, 2-2S, R4S, 4-1S, 8X at least. 1-3 also see similar ones. Here there's 2 runs, 2 controls per run. At a level of 4 sigma, he's better, we are better, and he says, okay, you can run controls twice a day and 2 runs per control and implement 1-3S, 2-2S, R4S, 4-1S. At 5 sigma, we can run 1 time control, 2 controls per run, and only put 1-3S, 2-2S, R4S. And at 6 sigma, only once a run and 2 levels and 1 single rule of 1-3S. So this is a graded analysis of how we can, with the level of performance or whatever sigma metric your analyte has, the number of runs and the number of controls per run and the number of SPC rules. These are all the Westcard rules are actually called as statistical process control rules, SPC rules. They can be modified or they can be tweaked or implemented according to the performance at every. So one size does not fit all, and different strategies or different QC rules can be set up according to whether an analyte is performing well or not based on its Six Sigma. Now, definitely there's an advantage of adopting Six Sigma metrics in a lab. You get accurate, precise results. You definitely have a reduction in repeats, both in QC and in patient samples. Your QC failures go down. Your required troubleshooting goes down. Your TAT is reduced. And you definitely have, in the end, a significant savings in supplies for running calibrations and controls. One small example, even if you save 1 aliquot of QC, you see that each run for QC, you take 1 aliquot. 1 aliquot has 200 microliter. 60 aliquots will have about 12 ml. Each control vial contains about 5 ml. So even if you save 2.5 vials, it's a lot of money. At the end of the month, you are saving almost like 36,000 rupees per month, or percentage of 20%. So this is only if you are going to change the altered QC schedule on the basis of sigma metrics to routine parameters. So even if 1 aliquot you are saving, look at the saving when you're translating it from aliquot to money and percentage. So this is just a small example of even 1 aliquot of QC can have a cost saving effect. If we look at the cumulative impact of how much we can save, it will be huge, I'm sure, in all the labs. Environment also benefits from good sigma metrics. We have less QC means less expense, less use of consumables, less impact on the environment. Okay. And with that, I come to the end of my talk. And as Robin Sharma says, small daily improvements over time do lead to stunning results. And thank you for a very patient listening.
Thank you, ma'am, for that elaborate talk. And as you can see, there are some questions in the chat box.
Sure.
Let's read them one by one. The first is, can you kindly elaborate on interpretation of blind Altman plot? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so Bland-Altman plot, I don't think we can show the slides and all here. It is done with the CLSI has got good guidelines for that. How do you compare two methods? Typically, method 1, method 2, graphs I have shown. I think I can share references later on apart from this to how actually implement a Bland-Altman analysis. It's a completely different topic. I did mention it because it was important to tell that passing Bablock and Bland-Altman are two ways of good method comparison, robust tools. I can, send that to you offline if that is okay. If that's okay.
Yes. The second question is, why 1.65 is taken to calculate total analytical error?
That's a factor they have calculated as a Z factor. So after that, Z is the 1.65 is the factor multiplied to the for the random error calculation they have put. That's the factor we get.
Is it preferable to apply the 10x rule?
It is preferable for sure. It is not mandatory. Definitely, it is preferable because it will definitely help you to pick up any shifts or trends or changes in your quality control. Definitely.
Yes. Next question: what is the difference between drift and trend?
A drift and trend, in that sense, a shift and trend are very different. A drift is obviously more gradual, and so is a trend. They're pretty much the same thing. The chart is moving. Your values will move slowly away from the mean, up or down, and these are because of errors which creep into your system slowly and over the last couple of days. Subtle things, they will cause the changes. So drift and trend are something I would say pretty much similar. Shift and trend are very different. Shift is more sudden, but drift and trend are both are gradual processes.
The next question also got into 10x rule, leading to narrow SD. Can you clarify on that?
Sorry?
What could be the solution after applying the
10x rule? Okay. So after 10x rule, so it is not mandated to use 10x rule as a rejection criteria. Here in India, see, we are following NAVL 112, which has not mentioned in the latest edition, which we are following till today. The new one is in the making, and we have yet to get it. But in the current one, which we're all following, the 10x rule is it is not mandatory. What the solution is, you find a bias, you need to go and introspect into all elements. Your calibration, when did this happen? At the 10 points, what different did you do on that day? That you must take some corrective action, but look at all the aspects. You don't have to reject, but definitely look into all the aspects: reagent, manpower, maintenance, calibration, everything. But rejection is not mandatory. If you want to put it in your lab, you can do it. It is helpful to put as a rejection. It depends on the people also. Depends on what is the kind of people who are going to be reviewing the LJ charts in that lab. How confident are you that your team will not release any abnormal results? If you feel no, you want to build in a greater control in your system, then you can put as a rejection rule. Otherwise, you should use a warning rule to alert you that there has been a change. Again, a drift. Usually a 10x will come like a drift. A 10x will mostly come like a drift. Something has been building up for the last 8, 9, 10 points. So yes, it will make you introspect, look at all aspects, and take corrective action.
Next question is, what are the total allowable error specifications for infectious disease serology parameters, where the results are qualitative? Also in histopathology and microbiology, any specific reference document we can look into?
Okay. See, histopathology, no, I don't think for histopathology, microbiology, we do not have any qualitative for total error. It is definitely going to be, see, for your, all the qualitative parameters is only going to be concordance, interpretation, where the results have to be same, clinically similar, right? Normal is normal, abnormal is abnormal. For serology parameters, definitely you have the same kind of, wherever available, you need to check the database and see what you can get from the CLIA guidelines. CLIA does have a few for serology. Again, I will see if I can get the CLIA guidelines on serology and get back to you with this infectious markers. I'll see if we can get some sources for that.
Yes. Next question, can you please explain Six Sigma matrix calculation?
Yeah, sure. 1 minute, just a second. I will come back to this total error specifications. Okay, allowable total error. Yeah. So we'll just see if CLIA has defined anything for infectious disease. I'll have to check on that. Six Sigma matrix. Yeah, I told you, Six Sigma is like this. This is the sigma calculation. Here, see, we're looking at a total error which was given here for glucose. 10% is your total allowable error. In this particular, in the first example, we have taken total error in all percentage, we're using the units. Now, observed mean was 190 and the target is 200. So the difference is 10, 10 divided by 200, right? So the bias is coming to 5%. CV of that glucose per month is going to be 3%, and the total allowable error is 10. So here sigma calculation is 10, which is 10 minus 5 that we got in this case, divided by 3. So total error minus bias divided by CV for where you're using percentage, and where you're using the units. Again, here total error in units minus bias in units divided by SD in units. That is the format.
Yes. The next question is, when we calculate total allowable error, which CV percent and bias we choose?
Okay. Elaborate. Yeah, very commonly query in everybody's mind, which CV and which bias. Now again, bias can be taken from one of the common recommendations is to use bias from your EQUAS program, because there you're comparing yourself with the assigned value of the EQUAS. You can take the bias from the EQUAS program. And for CV, the CV you will be taking for a monthly will be the one you're achieving currently. The CV is what you're achieving. Both of these are what you will be achieving. But that is for your current one. But for allowable error limits, I'm not clear. What do you want to talk about? Total allowable error, fixed limits, or what you're achieving in the lab? Your present calculation. You want to calculate.
I think, yeah, what we are achieving in the lab, I think that is the question.
Yeah. So
total error, not total error, not total allowable.
Total TEA is total allowable error, which is fixed. You will fix it using some guidelines, like we just did, right? Looking at CLIA or looking at guidelines from the RCPA or whatever. Then, depending on what is that? A total error in your lab. Right. TEA you have to. Yeah. CV is what you achieve, and bias is from the EQUAS. CV is from an internal CV. If you do a monthly tracking, then you should use the CV that you're achieving on a monthly basis. And bias is from the EQUAS program. That can be one way. That's commonly done. A lot of people do it like that, using bias from the EQUAS performance and CV from your monthly CV performance.
Okay. Next question: can we use total allowable error for machine verification, as bias is very tight?
See, total allowable error is a combination of precision and bias. In method verification also, we have got two components. Precision study itself is done. How I don't understand why. Maybe your question is not very clear. Why would a tight bias be a limitation for you for machine verification? And why would you? So I'm saying bias is very tight means what criteria have you set for the bias? We need to know. The example I gave you for machine verification had using a bias of R.975 for machine verification. Is there something else that you have set as a criteria? Then share that. Machine verification, I would not advise to use it because bias is tight. Let's understand more why your bias is tight. I mean.
The next question is on the 10x rule. Is it advisable to change the mean, floating mean versus fixed mean? Kindly comment.
Okay. I am not personally in favor of the floating mean ever, because the floating mean is a self-updating mean, which is frequently self-updating, and that causes you don't realize where you are. It is from all of my knowledge and understanding experience, fixed mean is definitely preferred by most people. You cannot decide on the 10x rule to change the mean based on that. No, it's not right. Change of mean has to be a very well thought of decision and justified why you want to change the mean. Change of mean is something you should do when nothing else is left in your hands. You have evaluated everything thoroughly. You have looked into every aspect of your system, man, machine, method, everything. And you find that you are satisfied on all aspects, and still you are not, you compare yourself with the peer group. This peer group data, which is available to most users who are using the Bharat controls, the Unity peer group report is a good way of seeing it. Compare your EQUAS performance with your EQUAS peer group and see where you stand. If there is something wrong between you and your peer, whether in the EQUAS or in the IQC, that means something you are doing wrong. Changing of the mean should be the last step. And I really don't know why would a 10x rule, no, it was not advisable to change it unless you are very sure that all other factors have been sorted out, cleared, and there is nothing else you can do. Lab mean changing is not the immediate answer. No, please don't do that.
Again, another continuation. After how many data points should we keep updating our lab mean?
Typically, lab mean is most labs, especially also NAB also advises that we say initially when we start a new lot of the control material, we use manufacturer guidelines, manufacturer mean. Up to 20 data points, you are allowed to be on the manufacturer's limits. And after 20 points, you should set a provisional mean. Now, after that, most labs will review the mean at 60 points and 90 points. And then review the mean. And if they feel that they need to reset the mean, they will reset it. Some achieved, some are satisfied, and they choose to be on that same database of the mean set on the 20 data points initially. Updating only after you fixed it now at 60 or 90, then you should review it from time to time and update it only, as I said, when indicated, when you find there's a problem, your mean is drifting, something has happened which you're not able to sort out, and you would attribute it to reagent drift over time. Maybe that's when. Otherwise, no.
Okay, well, next question. Is calculating Six Sigma and following QC practices accordingly acceptable if the lab is NABL accredited?
Well, as per me, yes. I've seen in a lot of, see, NABL only gives you minimum requirement for the QC, right? Nobody is stopping you from doing the more, nobody is stopping you from doing more QC runs. If you, I don't think anybody would have a problem by saying that you're doing Six Sigma, but your work has to be thorough and explain to the other person that I have done. If your Six Sigma is so good that you're going to run only one run of control per day and not two, that's the only situation. Otherwise, all these Sigma metrics are asking you to run multiple runs with multiple controls every day. That's more than what NABL asks for. NABL says 2 levels on every day of the testing, right? And then 1 level every 8 hours thereafter. Unless you are at 6 Sigma or 5 Sigma, at least you have to do at least that much. You have to anyways, you have to do more than that. If you are at 6 Sigma, if you're able to explain, I don't think there would be a problem. Let us see what the new 112 document which accompanies the 15189-2022 version will come with, if there is any more clarity on how much we can. Earlier, see, the 112 is to specify that you use 12s, 22s as a 12s warning, 22s rejection. And the 2012 version use these as warning rejection rules. In the 2019 version, they have removed that also. They have said the lab can define its own QC rules and rejection rules. There is no mandate. So let us see if they come up with something even more. Let's see what they come up with in terms of IQC in this new coming up 112 version.
And again, they have requested to explain bias, total error, total allowable error.
That's the whole presentation. I think that will be difficult to explain. All the slides you can share. I mean, that will be a little difficult to explain all of it.
Okay, next is R in correlation. R in correlation is near to 1. What is the role of slope?
Yeah. So when we compare two methods, we often doing it in an equation form y is equal to mx plus c. There's a whole y slope is m and c is the intercept. We can that has a different way of looking at that. But r is equal to 1 and slope are not the same thing. They are different ways of looking at the same concordance method. Slope intercept is a different way, and r is a different way. They're not the same thing. They are a different perspective of the same problem.
Okay. Next question, can we use plus or minus 10% for INC? What about parameters very low value? For very rare parameters, what's the minimum number of samples required for calculating total error?
Plus minus 10% for ILC. We just talked about total error guidelines. Again, we talked about Stockholm hierarchy. So how do we come to plus minus 10% based on that? A lot of labs are doing that. I know that. But what is the logic? With this background of Stockholm hierarchy, we've given you the guidelines. You should be able to come to some logic. What parameter is it? Why 10% may be too high, no? For something like potassium or even for glucose. You should use the medical decision limits that we have told you or guidelines from CLIA, not just go with 10%. Low value means what? Low value, parameter with very low value means 0.3, 0.2.
Next question. If some parameters have total allowable in both biological variation database and CLIA as well, which should be followed for total error acceptance?
In the Stockholm hierarchy, biological variation is rated above CLIA. So from that logic, you can go with biological variation, and it is definitely a little more. It is definitely more accurate and slightly more stringent than CLIA, which is not too tight in that sense. In that case, I would say biological variation, because we have a scientific document also which puts biological variation immediately after medical decision limits.
Yes, ma'am. Next question. Change in mean due to reagent lot change. How to address that?
Your reagent lot changed only once. Did you do a new lot verification, first of all? If the new lot is so different that your mean has changed, then you unlikely that you passed your new lot verification. You would have you done your new lot verification properly using patient samples or QC samples, 2 samples minimum? What is the result of that? If there was so much of change, that unlikely that you will have a satisfactory lot also. It has passed in the new lot verification and immediately change your mean.
Yes, ma'am.
First look into that part. Did it pass the variation? Did it pass the inter lot to lot verification? Don't change the mean because of lot change, unless you rule out everything else.
Yes. Next question. If our SD comes as less than 2, then our new own mean, which is set, has a very narrow reference range, which frequently leads to QC outliers. What should be done then in such parameters? Because taking daily corrective action becomes very cumbersome.
SD is less than 2 for which parameter? SD will depend on the parameter, no? I don't know the parameter. If it is sodium, then 2 is, if it's potassium, 2 is very high, no? What is the parameter? If it is going to be alkaline phosphatase, then 2 is very small. That is okay, narrow, I agree. So it will depend on the parameter. What is the exact analyte we're talking about?
He's telling meant for whenever changing lab, changing of QC lot.
Our question is meant for whenever calculating lab mean on change of QC lot.
For most of the parameters.
Okay. No, I don't think that should not be a problem. Lab, you're taking your own SD. You know what? You should take your own SD, but you're achieving. Again, I said it will depend on the parameter to parameter. If your performance is good, if your instrument is performing well, you will get narrow SD. That's why we say, so what you can do is fix your lab mean at 20 points and review the mean at 60 points or 90 points. If at 60 or 90 points also, your SD is 2, that means your system is capable of giving you a good performance of 2 SD. Then there's no reason to worry about that. If at 20 points, you fix the provisional mean, you work on that for 60 points. Look at the data again. You might get a broader SD in that case. That might be helpful. So don't take it on, just don't fix the mean on 20 points. Fix on 20, review at 60, review at 90 again. And put this in your SOP that you will review at 60 points or 90 points.
Thank you. I think we have answered most of the questions. The other question regarding certificates, I don't think certificate was promised for this session. But anyway, I'll check with the secretariat once. Any other comments are there? You can open in the chat box.
This is the sigma calculation. Here, see, we're looking at the total error which is given here for glucose. 10% is your total allowable error. In the first example, we have taken total error in all percentage we're using units. Now, observed mean was 190 and the target is 200. So the difference is 10 divided by 200, right? So the bias is coming to 5%. CV of that glucose per month is going to be 3% and the total allowable error is 10. So here sigma calculation is 10, which is 10 minus 5 that we got in this case, divided by 3. So total error minus bias divided by CV for where you're using percentage, and where you're using the units. Again, here total error in units minus bias in units divided by SD in units. That is the format.
Yes, ma'am. The next question is, when we calculate total allowable error, which CV percent and bias we choose?
Okay. Elaborate. Yeah, very commonly query in everybody's mind, which CV and which bias. Now again, bias can be taken from one of the common recommendations is to use bias from your EQUAS program, because there you're comparing yourself with the assigned value of the EQUAS. You can take the bias from the EQUAS program. And for CV, the CV you will be taking for a monthly will be the one you're achieving currently. The CV is what you're achieving. Both of these are what you will be achieving. But that is for your current one. But for allowable error limits, I'm not clear. What do you want to talk about? Total allowable error, fixed limits, or what you're achieving in the lab? Your present calculation. You want to calculate.
I think, what we are achieving in the lab, I think that is the question.
Yeah. So
total error, not total
Total TEA is total allowable error, which is fixed. You will fix it using some guidelines, like we just did, right? Looking at CLIA or looking at guidelines from the RCPA or whatever. Then, depending on what is that, a total error in your lab.
Right.
TEA you have to.
Yeah.
CV is what you achieve and bias is from the equals. CV is from your internal CV. If you do a monthly tracking, then you should use the CV that you're achieving on a monthly basis. And bias is from the equals program. That can be one way. That's commonly done. A lot of people do it like that, using bias from the equals performance and CV from your monthly CV performance.
Okay. Next question: can we use total allowable error for machine verification, as bias is very tight?
See, total allowable error is a combination of precision and bias. In method verification also, we have got two components. Precision study itself is done. How I don't understand why, maybe your question is not very clear, why would a tight bias be a limitation for you for machine verification? And why would you, so I'm saying bias is very tight means what criteria have you set for the bias? We need to know. The example I gave you for machine verification had using a bias of R.975 for machine verification. Is there something else that you have set as a criteria? Then share that. Machine verification, I would not advise to use it because bias is tight. Let's understand more why your bias is tight. I mean.
The next question is on the 10x rule. Is it advisable to change the mean, floating mean versus fixed mean? Kindly comment.
Okay. I am not personally in favor of the floating mean ever, because the floating mean is a self-updating mean, which is frequently self-updating, and that causes you don't realize where you are. It is from all of my knowledge, understanding, experience, fixed mean is definitely preferred by most people. You cannot decide on the 10x rule to change the mean based on that. No, it's not right. Change of mean has to be a very well thought of decision and justified why you want to change the mean. Change of mean is something you should do when nothing else is left in your hands. You have evaluated everything thoroughly. You have looked into every aspect of your system, man, machine, method, everything. And if you find that you are satisfied on all aspects and still you are not, you compare yourself with the peer group. This peer group data, which is available to most users who are using the Bharat controls, the Unity peer group report is a good way of seeing it. Compare your EQUAS performance with your EQUAS peer group and see where you stand. If there is something wrong between you and your peer, whether in the EQUAS or in the IQC, that means something you are doing wrong. Changing of the mean should be the last step. And I really don't know why would a 10x rule, no, it was not advisable to change it unless you are very sure that all other factors have been sorted out, cleared, and there is nothing else you can do. Lab mean changing is not the immediate answer. No, please don't do that.
Again, another continuation. After how many data points should we keep updating our lab mean?
Typically, lab mean is most labs, especially also NAB also advises that we initially, when we start a new lot of the control material, we use manufacturer guidelines, manufacturer mean. Up to 20 data points, you are allowed to be on the manufacturer's limits. And after 20 points, you should set a provisional mean. Now, after that, most labs will review the mean at 60 points and 90 points. And then review the mean. And if they feel that they need to reset the mean, they will reset it. Some achieved, some are satisfied, and they choose to be on that same database of the mean set on the 20 data points initially. Updating only after you fixed it now at 60 or 90, then you should review it from time to time and update it only, as I said, when indicated, when you find there's a problem, your mean is drifting, something has happened which you're not able to sort out, and you would attribute it to reagent drift over time. Maybe that's when. Otherwise, no.
Okay, next question: is calculating Six Sigma and following QC practices accordingly acceptable if the lab is NABL accredited?
Well, as per me, yes. I've seen in a lot of see, NABL only gives you minimum requirement for the QC, right? Nobody is stopping you from doing the more. Nobody is stopping you from doing more QC runs. If you, I don't think anybody would have a problem by saying that you're doing Six Sigma, but your work has to be thorough and explain to the other person that I have done If your Six Sigma is so good that you're going to run only one run of control per day and not two, that's the only situation. Otherwise, all these Sigma metrics are asking you to run multiple runs with multiple controls every day. That's more than what NABL asks for. NABL says 2 levels on every day of the testing, right? And then 1 level every 8 hours thereafter. Unless you are at 6 Sigma or 5 Sigma, at least you have to do at least that much. You have to, anyways, you have to do more than that. If you are at 6 Sigma, if you're able to explain, I don't think there would be a problem. Let us see what the new 112 document which accompanies the 15189-2022 version will come with, if there is any more clarity on how much we can. Earlier, see, the 112 is to specify that you use 12s, 22s as a 12s warning, 22s rejection. And the 2012 version use these as warning rejection rules. In the 2019 version, they have removed that also. They have said the lab can define its own QC rules and rejection rules. There is no mandate. So let us see if they come up with something even more. Let's see what they come up with in terms of IQC in this new coming up 112 version.
And again, they have requested to explain bias, total error, total allowable error.
That's the whole presentation. I think that will be difficult to explain. All the slides you can share. I mean, that will be a little difficult to explain all of it.
Okay, next is R in correlation. R in correlation is near to 1. What is the role of slope?
Yeah. So when we compare two methods, we're often doing it in an equation form y is equal to mx plus c. There's a whole slope is m and c is the intercept. We can, that has a different way of looking at that, but r is equal to 1 and slope are not the same thing. They are different ways of looking at the same concordance method. Slope intercept is a different way and r is a different way. They're not the same thing. They are a different perspective of the same problem.
Okay. Next question, can we use plus or minus 10% for INC? What about parameters very low value? For very rare parameters, what's the minimum number of samples required for calculating total error?
Plus minus 10% for ILC. We just talked about total error guidelines. Again, we talked about Stockholm hierarchy. So how do we come to plus minus 10% based on that? A lot of labs are doing that. I know that. But what is the logic? With this background of Stockholm hierarchy, we've given you the guidelines. You should be able to come to some logic. What parameter is it? Why 10% may be too high, no? For something like potassium or even for glucose. You should use the medical decision limits that we have told you or guidelines from CLIA, not just go with 10%. Low value means what? Low value, parameter with very low value means 0.3, 0.2.
Next question. If some parameters have total allowable in both biological variation database and CLIA as well, which should be followed for total error acceptance?
In the Stockholm hierarchy, biological variation is rated above CLIA. So from that logic, you can go with biological variation, and it is definitely a little more. It is definitely more accurate and slightly more stringent than CLIA, which is not too tight in that sense. In that case, I would say biological variation, because we have a scientific document also which puts biological variation immediately after medical decision limits.
Yes. Next question. Change in mean due to reagent lot change. How to address that?
Your reagent lot changed only once. Did you do a new lot verification, first of all? If the new lot is so different that your mean has changed, then you unlikely that you passed your new lot verification. You would have you done your new lot verification properly using patient samples or QC samples, 2 samples minimum? What is the result of that? If there was so much of change, that unlikely that you will have a satisfactory lot also. It has passed in the new lot verification and immediately change your mean.
Yes, sir.
First look into that part. Did it pass the variation? Did it pass the inter lot to lot verification? Don't change the mean because of lot change unless you rule out everything else.
Yes. Next question. If our SD comes as less than 2, then our new own mean, which is set, has a very narrow reference range, which frequently leads to QC outliers. What should be done then in such parameters? Because taking daily corrective action becomes very cumbersome.
SD is less than 2 for which parameter? SD will depend on the parameter, no? I don't know the parameter. If it is sodium, then 2, if it's potassium, 2 is very high, no? What is the parameter? If it is going to be alkaline phosphatase, then Then 2 is very small. That is okay, narrow. I agree. So it will depend on the parameter. What is the exact analyte we're talking about?
Is the link meant for whenever changing lab, changing of QC lot?
Our question is meant for whenever calculating lab mean on change of QC lot.
For most of the parameters.
Okay. No, I don't think that should not be a problem. Lab, you're taking your own SD. You know what? You should take your own SD, but you're achieving. Again, I said it will depend on the parameter to parameter. If your performance is good, if your instrument is performing well, you will get narrow SD. That's why we say, so what you can do is fix your lab in at 20 points and review the main at 60 points or 90 points. If at 60 or 90 points also, your SD is 2, that means your system is capable of giving you a good performance of 2 SD. Then there's no reason to worry about that. If at 20 points, you fix the provisional mean, you work on that for 60 points. Look at the data again. You might get a broader SD in that case. That might be helpful. So don't take it on, just don't fix the mean on 20 points. Fix on 20, review at 60, review at 90 again. And put this in your SOP that you will review at 60 points or 90 points.
Thank you. I think we have answered most of the questions. The other question regarding certificates, I don't think certificate was promised for this session. But anyway, I'll check with the secretariat once. Any other comments are there? You can open in the chat box. Yeah, a lot of compliments were there definitely. And I think the recording will be shared very soon in the video.
Sure. The question, one was serology and one more, please share that to me. I'll get back to them, please.
Yeah, there's one more question.
Yeah.
Dr. Zubair, I would just like to answer the question which is on certificate.
Yeah.
So to all the participants who have attended the session for more than 45 minutes, a certification of participation shall be provided. A link shall be sent to you from the CAHO Secretariat. You can download it if you have participated for more than 45 minutes. Okay, so we have the entire data with it. I have confirmed it with our Secretariat and you'll be provided. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from our panelists? Yeah, you can give some remarks.
Yeah, and for all those who are concerned about the PPT, we would not be sharing the PPT, but entire presentation in the form of a video shall shortly be uploaded on the CAHO website. And I have given the link in the chat box, so you all can access it and re-study or re-look at it and enhance your knowledge. And thank you so much, Dr. Puneeta, for such a wonderful session. I would hand over it to Zubair again so that he can conclude it. If there are any questions, you can just put it up in the chat box or in the Q&A. We would definitely love to answer it.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. I would just like to announce that the next webinar will be with Dr. Venkatesh Thuppil on PT. The exact dates will be announced very soon. And thank you, ma'am. Thank you for this wonderful session. It was indeed very mind-boggling, but you have really clearly explained and taken ample of time to explain the concepts. So I'm once again very grateful.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a patient listening. And if any more questions, please tell CAHO and Dr. Zubair can convey them to me, and I'll get back to you for sure. For the serology, I'll definitely get back. Thanks a lot.
Yes, this is our next webinar coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of comments and compliments. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.